Good afternoon. My name is Barbara Costa. I'm the Department of German Studies here at the University of Arizona, and it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists this afternoon in our actually final panel, but it's, I think, not going to be the last of our discussions on multilingualism. Okay. Well, I'd like to, as I said, welcome you to the panel this afternoon. It is Multilingualism Unmoored, and in the interest of time, the introductions are going to be brief. Our first speaker is Alison Phipps, the Professor of Languages, Intercultural Studies at the University of Glasgow, and co-convener of Glasgow Refugee, Asylum, and Migration Network. The title of her presentation today is Unmoored: Language, Pain, Porosity, and Poisonwood. Welcome, Alison.
Thank you, Barbara, very much. David, Chantal, and also Melina, Ambalia, Kerry, and everybody else. Thank you. And thank you as well for this. In your invitation, you said, it is becoming clear that the very nature of multilingualism is now increasingly unmoored, even from the frameworks that were applied in the 1990s. And for this word, unmoored, I'm profoundly grateful. Holding on. Know what hand pushes the boat out. The scent of a shadow on worn wood, something or nothing gently perceived, as an old violin retains its voice when played by others, so a boat, unmoored at dawn, drifts like a half-forgotten dream between green islands. There is comfort in the shape, the cradling image that holds meaning and beauty too, as in all things where need determines shape and you have use of the vessel. To be moored requires twin anchors. To be moored suggests safety. What Gerald Manley Hopkins described as where the green swell is in the havens dumb and out of the swing of the sea. Certainty, security, safety, steadiness. Confident in the order of things, that things and people are in the place where they are expected to be, that the world is known and can be controlled and can be understood. Confident in the languages of people and place. Unmooring occurs when one or both of the twin anchors are raised. Monolingualism and multilingualism as anchors being raised. And unmooring, when one or both anchors are raised, means movement, a possible loss of control, a movement into what may be unknown, however charted. Unmooring may be a human activity that is chosen, or it may be the drag of a storm. To be unmoored suggests possibility, but potential pain, insecurity and escape, freedom, hope, danger, release, and a seaward flow. I'd like to argue that the languages used to language in this flow, not the languages for the mooring, but for the flow, have really to attempt to work through the loss and the possibilities, the pain and the hope that unmooring determines, and which I believe are now radically unpredictable in the turbulence of a tossing sea. The unmoorings, the loss of one or both anchors of multilingualism are myriad and are occurring at multiple levels: the level of self, the level of kinship and family, the level of community, of work, environment, the level of market, and obviously of politics, local and global. And all of these aspects, and we've heard about these over the last couple of days, have attracted considerable scholarly attention. Though what I've sensed over the last couple of days is that our attention has focused rather more on the geopolitical questions and on our own professional insecurities of loss, perhaps, than the intimate contexts of family, broken up, unmoored, split apart, in the tossing and turbulence and the flotsam and jetsam of migration and mobility. Claire Cramsh has said that to survive linguistically and emotionally the contradictions of everyday life, multilingual subjects draw on the formal, semiotic, and aesthetic resources afforded by various symbolic systems to reframe these contradictions and create alternative worlds of their own. These unmoorings, with their contradictions, creative forms, and emerging symbolic systems, are experienced multilingually and monolingually at one and the same time, but are also felt deeply and ontologically. And for an understanding of ontology, certainly for myself, I need to turn to the poets. And here I turn to Anne Carson, the classicist scholar and poet, where she talks of the pleasure of refiguring being when unmoored, and doing so in language. And she says, I like the feel of words, doing what they want to do, and as they have to do it. And that's in Autobiography of Red. And in a later interview, she says of this process of the feel of words doing what they want to do and as they have to do, that it's about the way words interact with each other as what she calls daubs of meaning. You know, as impressionist colours interact, daubs of paint, and you stand back and see a story emerge from the way that things are placed next to each other. You can do that with language, she says. But that kind of unmooring is not equitable. It's not just a pleasurable experience for classicist scholars and people with the leisure for poetry, because the unmoored are more often than not the migrants, the refugees, and asylum seekers who live amongst us. And here, words do not do as they want them to at all, and there is little choice about words and how they might work in any intersections with the bureaucratic and state powers that determine the status and safety and security that might offer moorings. And I think it's these groups that can offer and afford us possibilities for conceptualizing multilingual being and what happens to language under the pressure of the pains of unmooring, and from within contexts where there is often no concept at all of what it might mean to be monolingualism, but where people have always lived their lives spinning perhaps on one anchor of multilingualism. As I've thought about these aspects, I've realised that there's a challenge to me as a scholar, and that I can take my critical understandings of these issues so far, but if these are ontological questions, and if I'm an anthropologist, then perhaps in the words of the poet Rilke, ich muss mein Leben ändern. I have to change my life. I have to follow the words of Lucy Rigoret, elaborate a different subjectivity. And for me, that has meant stepping into the turbulence of social action and change, and actually unmooring my own languages. I love to speak French and German. I worked hard to learn them and to be able to pass. But these are languages that belong to a different understanding of the possibilities of multilingualism. And as a result of what were deeply felt intellectual understandings in myself, I decided, together with my family, to open our home to those who are unmoored and who have nowhere to live, but whose languages are not English and whose status is determined often by the analyses of the languages that they speak. So in 2006, we opened up our home and chose to live with the unmoored, participating in what I might call now multilingual minus 2.0. and trying to understand in every aspect of my life what it might be to be multilingual from below, what it might be to be in relationship with those, deeply in relationship with those who are not like I am, who are entirely other in their privilege and position, but to do so at my table in my bathroom, where we try and put the toothpaste back in the tube. And to do so that I too would experience my own multilingualism from above, but begin to maybe experience the multilingualism from above, from below. Lucy Irigaray talks about this as sharing the world. Meeting a stranger outside of our own boundaries is rather easy and even satisfies our aspirations, she says, as long as we can return home and appropriate between ourselves what we have in this way discovered. But to be forced to limit and change our home or our way of being at home is much more difficult, especially without being unfaithful to ourselves. This requires us to elaborate a different subjectivity from which has for centuries been ours. A subjectivity for which coexistence and exchange only took place between those who were alike and inside a single tradition. This experience, I can tell you, hurts. And Carson describes the hurt of this kind of work as decreation, and sees this place where we might struggle for status, being, ontological understanding, as the place of the ancient struggle of breath against death, in a poem beautifully entitled No Port Now. And for Carson, but also before her, for Simone, and for the scholar Elaine Scarry, I think there is an affirmation that what is most meaningful in life can be conveyed in language, and also an acknowledgement that under the pressure of pain, language itself will revert to a cry of pain. It will begin to disintegrate. And this ancient struggle, to me, this place where our language leaves us and is reconfigured in the expressions of pain, the fragmentary nature of language, is a way of us thinking through multilingualism as it is unmoored and the unmooring is experienced, and an opportunity for us, perhaps, some of us, to participate in this process, in what I might call the contact with the nerve endings, the tender points of speech. One of the many people who came to live with us was an unaccompanied minor from a country called Eritrea in the Horn of Africa, one of the most oppressed nations in the world. She has two mother tongues, Bilen and Tigrinya, she tells me. She has 4 scripts that she works in and at least 6 languages, different tonalities, different questions of language and power. During the time that this young lady spent with us, we discovered that she had experienced multiple forms of oppression. And she was also age disputed, taken from our home and detained. When she was returned to us, it was as our daughter. And this then led me into a situation of mother tongue pain, because of course I did not speak as a mother the language of my daughter, and was pitched into a situation of linguistic exhaustion, of autodidacticism, of attempting to learn a language which, in the context of speakers of her languages in the UK, I was not allowed to pay for, because to pay the speakers would have been illegal. Painfully slowly, I'm using my pen to trace the shapes of the Ge'ez script as I begin to learn Tigrinya, one of the mother tongues of my foster daughter. The irony is intense. A daughter tongue. It curves beautifully as I trace out the contours that would make the pointing of her name. I'm hopelessly bad at this. It's a bodily technique of literacy I'm applying in the silence and my immense struggle to voice the consonants and vowels that are so remote from my phonetic experience. It's as if I'm taking a line for a walk, as Paul Klee would say, and it's taking me all over the world, imagining the country of her belonging, the images I've pulled up online, the way she laughs, encouraging, delighted at my pathetic attempts, the intensity of the use of this script in Pentecostal worship down the road, where she and other exiles gather in hope. I smile as I realize I know the words for peace, for mercy, for hope, but not for war, torture, or hell. She teaches me to chant the script. He, hu, hi, ha, ye, hi, ho. Le, lu, li, la, lie, li, lo. My foster daughter is teaching me her mother tongues, a tongue to foster, a daughter's tongue. This experience that I'm speaking of here, and which I think also Don was speaking of yesterday, is described beautifully by the anthropologist Tim Ingold, which I think is about the pain of being unmoored. To the skilled practitioner absorbed in an activity, the things he or she uses are available and ready to hand. So long as the activity flows smoothly, their objectness melts into the flow. Only when the instrument fails to respond to the demands of the moment does the practitioner run hard up against it and its brute facticity. In this sense, humans alone are haunted by the spectre of the loss of meaning that occurs when action fails. It is not in their construction of meaningful worlds, then, that the singularity of human beings resides, he says, but rather in their occasional glimpses of a world rendered meaningless by its disassociation from action. Through the experiences of our foster daughter, I've seen the ways in which the world is rendered meaningless through the power of the state and the different ways it tries to dispute the status of people who are not like it. And it would rather stayed gratefully back in Africa, being poor recipients but grateful recipients of our charity. First of all, the age was disputed, then the origins were disputed, then the languages were disputed. There were court cases, there were campaigns trying to demonstrate and prove through bizarre processes of recording snatches of language onto tape recording and sending them overseas to Belgium, to Sweden, that our daughter was indeed who she said she was, and that she was indeed innocent until proved guilty, rather than guilty until proved innocence. Much of the time, she could not speak of what has happened to her, and much of the time, in our pain and love for her, nor could we. And this, I believe, is because, as Elaine Scarry says, intense pain is also language destroying. As the content of one's world and meanings disintegrates, so that which would express and project the self is robbed of its source and its subject. Word, self, and voice are lost, or nearly lost. And in her wonderful book, On the Body in Pain, she speaks of the way that we then become, in our vulnerability, reliant on others to do the speaking for us, to take up our voices with tact and immediacy, to speak of what it is that they believe and trust that we are experiencing. And so what I saw in our situation were others, generous others, and some of you are here today, and I thank you for that, in their own multilingual advocacy on our behalves. The letters of Amnesty International, the letters of other people in various positions of expertise, knowing community, ethnic, and heritage languages, who spoke up and wrote on our behalf as experts and advocates to say, this is a suffering that is real, we trust it, and should be taken seriously. This language which has been destroyed, we will make again in a new form. And through all this time, the infallible cry that Simone speaks of, why am I suffering? A cry that is infallible because there is no human answer to it. The possibility is there of confident use, but as I'm discovering in refugee groups, and just last week I was in the Sudan with refugees, there is also this situation of linguistic disintegration where to speak is disallowed or blocked. Those paths that Melina gave to us at the start are not available at all, and there is a mute, resistant, or careful, tentative, momentary, fragmentary emergence into speech. Our daughter was eventually granted refugee status. This slide is my documentation of that. Every single line on that that's crossed out was where we had to go and sign on and defend who she was and who we were. And the very last one was the one where she was granted the possibility of refugee status and recognised as a refugee. She was not crossed off at that moment in time. In all of this, through the experience of not having the language of a daughter, through the experience of needing others to maintain a communication, I've realized how porous we are. Virginia Woolf said that once described herself as a porous vessel, afloat on a sensation, a sensitive palate exposed to invisible rays. Now, because after 5 years, we have managed to trace my daughter's family to Sudan, where they are living as refugees, my daughter's sister, aged 5, is teaching me her mother tongue. As I aini ayo, as I afa ayo, as I funchal ayo, as I zini ayo, she says, and runs away laughing. And as 2 weeks ago, I was able to put Rima into her mother's arms, who thought she was dead. Her mother, leaking as I was, wipes her own eyes and mine and mingles the tears. Mary Oliver says, never in my life had I felt so near that porous line where my own body was done with the roots and stems and the flowers began. Mental life, says Scarry, is porous, open to air and light. And far from being bounded entities in languages, our minds and bodies become sensitized, become porous, precisely at these places where we're at our nerve endings, our wits' ends. And it's not so much where we are multilingual subjects or agents, but rather it's perhaps a place where we are enlanguaged. Tim Ingold says, we would be wrong to assume that sensory experience is embodied or that through it people are tied to place. We may in practice be anchored to the ground, but it is not light, sound or feeling that holds us down. On the contrary, they contrive to sweep us off our feet. Light floods, sound drowns out, and feeling carries us away. Light, sound, and feeling tear at our moorings, just like wind tears at the roots of trees rooted to the earth. Thus, as it is immersed in the fluxes of the medium, for me language, the body is enlightened, ensounded, and enraptured. I think he gets a bit carried away at the end. But I would like to say that this move to sharing the world, this tearing at our moorings, does indeed require us to be enlanguaged, opening us out to all kinds of risk and vulnerability, new subjectivities and symbolic forms. I am at different times en-Germaned, en-Frenched, en-Portuguesed even, but now also, that mistake's there, especially for Deborah, I didn't tidy it up, en-Tigriniad and even slowly en-Arabic in these places of nerve ending. And the senses awake, memories, tastes, the feel of hot Sudanese sunshine, or the saltiness from 4 weeks ago of Gazan hope. Inshallah, they all said to me as the bombs dropped around us. So, finally, the question I ask myself is, where might I go to understand these tricky, risky, unmoored, vulnerable places that this act of language activism, this act of occupying multilingualism for myself, this ontological placing of my whole life might involve? And the place I've gone to, of course, is fiction and poetry. How might we live multilingually unmoored? What forms might give us more than a transitory glimpse into worlds as they pass by, rather than as we're anchored? Susan Sontag says, a narrative seems likely to be more effective than an image. And partly it's a question of the length of time, Anthony, one is obliged to look and to feel. In the Poisonwood Bible, Ada Price, the daughter of Nathan Price, a zealous Baptist missionary from Georgia working in the Congo and disintegrating before our eyes as his daughters make their own sense of their lives in Africa through languages, says this: I have found a language even more cynical than my own. In Kigalan, the word Nzolo is used in 3 different ways at least. It means most dearly beloved, or it is a thick yellow grub, highly prized for fish bait. Or it is a type of tiny potato that turns up in the market now and then, always sold in bunches that clumped along roots like knots on a string. And so we sing at the top of our lungs in church, Tata Nzolo. To whom are we calling? I think it must be the god of small potatoes. That other dearly beloved who resides in North Georgia does not seem to be paying much attention to the babies here in Kilanga. They are all dying. Dying from kaka, the disease that turns the body to a small black pitcher, pitches it over, and pours out all the liquids inside. I think the Poisonwood Bible is a wonderful novel of unmoorings, and the unmoorings with languages at its heart, the fixed language of the controlling ideological father, and then the fluid or porous or resistant or angry or pained enlanguaging of the four daughters just thrown up there by the will of their father. But it also draws on this metaphor of the poisonwood tree, the tree that produces some beautiful decorative wood used for carving and wood turning and furniture, but also which has a highly irritating sap, and that when you touch it and it gets on your skin, starts with a redness, itchy and burning blisters, pain and porosity. The tree leaks and sticks to the skin, which leaks in turn and makes us vulnerable and endangered. And I think for me, this is a wonderful metaphor for the enlanguaged condition. Walk to learn, I and path. Long one is Congo. Congo is one long path, and I learn walk. Maneni, the word for path. Mananeni, eneneman, Amen. Tata Jesus is Bangala, declares the Reverend every Sunday at the end of his sermon. More and more mistrusting his interpreters, he tries to speak in Kikongo. He throws back his head and speaks these words to the sky, whilst his lambs sit scratching themselves in wonder. Bangala means something precious and dearly beloved, but the way he pronounces it means the poisonwood tree. Praise the Lord, alleluia, my friends, for Jesus will make you itch like nobody's business. So I'd like to move to my conclusions. The forms humans build, whether in the imagination or on the ground, arise within the currents of their involved activity, says Tim Ingold. And I think this echoes a lot of what Anthony was saying before about translation producing meaning rather than equivalence. And he says that this occurs in the specific relational contexts of their practical engagement with their surroundings, working with materials, not just doing to them, and of bringing form into being. And I think that this is also what Claire was talking about when she was discussing the shifts from the modern to the postmodern forms of multilingualism. Shifts in the study of multilingualism from the bags, as she described them so beautifully, but maybe the forms, the formats, the templates, the transcripts, the pedagogies, the politics, towards a better appreciation of the material flows and the currents of sensory awareness. For me, the pain, the porosity, and the itch of poisonwood, within which both ideas and things reciprocally take shape. We recently welcomed Dr. Al-Jafari, who was the first democratically elected Prime Minister of Iraq, to our network. And we were translating, he was being translated for us from Arabic. We were told he doesn't speak in English. And we were having an interesting discussion where I used the phrase hermeneutics of suspicion, which the translator didn't know how to translate. So Dr. Al-Jafari translated it for the translator. And I was blown away. And I was blown away because what I realized that he was doing was using translation to maintain a situation of his own integrity within Arabic, but also to slow things down. And that in situations of conflict and insecurity and of unmooring, slowing things down is really important. And here I'd really like to echo what Don was saying at the end of his talk, which is that we need a space in which we can be enlanguaged. Susan Sontag says, space reserved for being serious is hard to come by in modern society, whose chief model of a public space is the megastore, which may be also an airport or a museum. And for me, the logic of scholarship means something different is required. An engaged and deliberate unmooring, the search for new moorings, requires not a little anger and a world of sensory experience. Yes, pain, but also pleasure, shaped and changed by languages from unexpected places. And what I need for this is space and time to be able to make sense of and engage with and move from the traumatic experience of disintegrated language into a place where indeed I can occupy multilingualism and where I can ask of myself repeatedly and every day anew in a context of a questioning of myself about justice, what is the life, the multilingual life I should live? I've attempted to put this talk into a short poem. Violets. In a different tongue, the educator renders your velvet zygomorphic, times actinomorphic, times cleistogamous. He differates your perianth into 5 imbricated sepals, the lowermost of which is commonly spurred. And there are nectariferous appendages that project backward into the spur of the petal. That one, yes, the one that is lowermost. There. Oh, spare me the lecture, and show me where they grow when the April's in her eye. Most violet seeds need a cooling period to trigger growth, he says. I need not draw the analogy. I don't believe in the growth trigger. They grow well if you grind the bones of dead words to dust and sprinkle the earth with their morbid power. This is not a metaphor. Culture comes from cutting back rotting matter with mattered matter. Culture comes from raking over the living with the dead. So lay her in the earth, and from her fair and unpolluted flesh may violets spring. There, look, a clump under the oak, against the fading winter of the grassy bank, purpling into the darks of blue, paling as soft as apricot, like patience on a monument, smiling at grief. Thank you.